I'm going to talk a little bit about ethics in the context of intelligent systems. And so first of all, I'll outline what the problem is, like why are we concerned about these kinds of things. Then I'll, oh, what's happening now? Then I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by ethics, so just a sort of broad outline rather than a lecture in ethical theories, which nobody really wants. And then I'm going to talk about 4 key ethical issues that are kind of emerging from this news and also from academic papers and things like that. So the kind of things that people are worried about and trying to find solutions to. All right, so when we talk about AI at the moment, the government defines it in a particular type of way. And they define it like this: the technologies with the ability to perform tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, and language translation. AI systems today also usually have the capacity to learn or adapt to new experiences or stimuli. Now, it's the last bit that everybody's worried about now. So what they're really concerned about is what happens when a machine can act in the world. So, you know, we have some concerns about what technology does to our minds and what technology does to our social spaces anyway, but when that technology then acts and makes decisions without us necessarily being involved with it, everybody's super worried. So I stand up a little bit higher. Okay, so what are our main concerns? Well, some of the main concerns are that these systems exhibit agency. So as I've talked about, they learn, they predict, they make decisions. And then on the other side of that, they're decreasingly predictable to us. So we can't necessarily understand how those decisions were reached or why. And they're also opaque to users to some extent, and even opaque to domain specialists. So when we're talking about deep neural nets, even a sort of a trained specialist couldn't necessarily tell you how that function was reached. And they're being applied in ever new domains. So we're talking about technology that blends biological entities, so us, animals, whatever you want, the physical environment. And this is becoming increasingly problematic. There's a legal academic at Edinburgh who talks about the Internet of Bodies, the idea that we're going to be somehow, with technology, compound, and that all of our ethical issues and legal issues in the future will be about that, what happens when technology is embedded in your body. They also decouple users from devices. What I've just described suggests they might couple us more closely, but in reality, we haven't got the same design space that we used to have. So when you would design an interface previously for something like a laptop, there's clear points of interaction with that system, right? Increasingly, that's not the case. You walk into a smart home, so your interaction is walking in to that smart home. That's the same as you walking into any home, but what happens as a result of it is fundamentally different. And these are the kind of things that are concerning because we don't have design models to deal with those kinds of interactions. And it's becoming core to our existence. So there was an event, not last week, but the week before, called CogX down in London, and it was specifically focused on artificial intelligence. And they had, I think it was a 3-track thing going on, and one of the tracks was ethics. So like, this is a big thing within AI right now. And one of the people from the all-party parliamentary group said that AI will become a fundamental utility. Now, that doesn't sound like anything particular, but if you think about what a utility is, like we think about things like water and electricity. So we don't notice them. Like, life just carries on, but we can't function without it. So you turn on your tap and the water doesn't flow, and suddenly, like, everybody starts panicking. You plug in your laptop and it's not getting charged. That's a problem. So what's the equivalent for AI? The idea that if all the algorithms in the world stopped working, then life as we know it would cease to exist. And that's a quote from a book called The Master Algorithm. So this is what people are starting to think about, that this is so core to our existence that if we don't think about it ethically, we're going to have problems in the long term. And then the thing that everybody focuses on right now is the idea that these systems are driven by data. So they require huge amounts of training data in order to give you the kind of function that you want. And the more data, the better. Well, the better data, the better, arguably. But the model we're going for is more right now. Now, the problem is that you can't trade in data anymore. So maybe, like, I don't know, when I started studying this like 10 years ago, people were sort of going, oh, you know, it's okay, I'm just going to give you this bit of data, you can train your model and it's no problem. But now we're realizing that actually data has value. It's been equated to oil in terms of value and a variety of other sort of valuable things. And this was one of my colleagues was tweeted about this, and he was just saying, you know, it's like, it's dirty. You can't talk about trading data anymore. It's just, you know, completely inappropriate. And why do we worry about ethics? Because if we don't, then what happens in the end is something really bad occurs, and then everybody panics and responds, and your system gets shut down, people don't buy your products. So from an industry perspective, dealing with ethics right at the start of a project ideation is becoming a huge priority. If you think about Google Glass as a product that failed because nobody really understood about privacy or people's social discomfort with other people monitoring them constantly, it's just like, what a huge investment for something that fell completely on its arse. Okay, so what are ethics? They're the codified process that tell us what is right and what is wrong. So the things that might, and consent is a really core idea of this. So for example, you can change what is right or wrong by consenting to something. I might not be able to come up and lick your face, but if you tell me if it's okay, then suddenly I can do that, right? So it changes the moral relationship between two humans. And our moral conduct is defined entirely by these rules. And sometimes the rules are explicit. So, you can't go around and shoot somebody. We have that kind of enshrined in law. And sometimes they're implicit. So there's certain things that it's like awkward and weird for me to do. And both of those things are equally relevant. And they're applied to moral agents. So a human being is a moral agent, for example. Like a plant is not. There's some debates as to whether an animal is. And we're starting to talk about robotics in the same way. So... like, are we going to start treating robots as though they're human agents, as though they are worthy of moral judgment? And we tend to decide whether something is a moral agent on two metrics. One of them is sentience. So is it smart? Is it as clever as a human? Is it more clever than a human? And the other one is sapience, and that is, can it feel stuff like a human can? So it's the experience of phenomenological things like empathy and hurt, pain, anger, those kinds of things. And if we created a system that was smarter than us and could feel all that stuff, then we would treat them as a moral agent. And we'd probably also be exterminated, or at least that's the current sort of thinking around this. Many of the questions that are arising from machine intelligence and AI, they don't have any moral precedents. Like, we've never really had to answer questions like this before. Science fiction's done a fairly good job, but that's really the only space within which you've seen any kind of serious analysis of what would happen if technology became more prominent in our lives. And I guess this is part of the process that you are all in the moment, part of responsible research and innovation. So there's lots of corresponding practices that are being scrutinised at the moment under the sort of auspices of data ethics. So responsible research and innovation, programming, hacking, ethical hacking, and professional codes are all the things that people are trying to bring to bear in order to deal with these kinds of issues. So now just a quick whip through some of the current ethical issues. So the first thing to say is that it's all about algorithms. That's what everybody's talking about at the moment. That's what everybody's concerned about. And different academics have said different things about why we should be concerned about algorithms. So it's been said that they limit our decisions. This is academic research in the context of stuff like recommender systems, for example. So, like Amazon will say, you bought this book, here are 3 others that other people like you might have bought. There are people that have said that that is just funneling us into particular types of decisions that we might not want to make. It's not really an important context, I guess, but it's one that illustrates it. They signal certainty in uncertain conditions. People are more likely to trust computers than they are humans. But actually, if you don't understand how accurate the function is, then that's really not a helpful model. They push us towards actions we wouldn't otherwise have taken. I think we've seen quite a lot of that recently in the news. I'll cover it quickly. And they limit our access to broader information. So quite a lot of the systems being designed are designed to help us make better judgments. It's not that they're designed, with the idea of sort of tripping us up or making us do bad things. It's more that they're designed because they want to help us reach better information. And the way by which they do that is by saying, OK, you can choose from 3 things rather than a million things, which our tiny human brain can't cope with. So people are saying that now anything that's based on algorithms is powerful in terms of its ability to control us socially. So there's 2 examples, and both of them sadly from Facebook, though unsurprisingly possibly. First one was the Facebook emotional contagion experiment. So this was where a series of Facebook feeds along, Facebook and Cornell University, influenced a series of Facebook feeds, some that were negative and some that were positive. And they looked at whether this had like an emotional effect. So did then other people in that kind of social graph also become sad or become happy on the basis of their Facebook feeds. And what they found was that they did, that actually if you manipulate people subtly by altering the things that they see through these kinds of systems, then you can result in feeds that are reflectively happy or sad. Now that can mean any number of things. It doesn't mean that everybody was happy or sad as a result. It can mean that, if you empathize with your friend and are having a crap time, then your Facebook feed is a little bit downplayed because you don't want to make them feel bad. But what they fail to consider here is that some people, may have mental health issues, and actually seeing negative things constantly could have had a massive impact on them, a negative impact. So it was incredibly narrow in terms of what they considered in terms of the social and emotional and mental health impacts of this kind of study. The more recent one is Cambridge Analytica. We all know what happened here. And this is a really good example of how when these systems are not visible to people, you just go about your lives thinking that you're making choices on the basis of the kinds of things you always made choices on the basis of, but you're not. In reality, there's some dynamic and sort of, power dynamic going on under the surface here that meant that you were seeing, if you were one of the subjects, all kinds of news that was propaganda or slanted or trying to convince you of a particular ideology, and it worked. I mean, it was really just enhancing what people believed anyway, but even so, it's social manipulation, and it's social manipulation in a space where people didn't expect it. And what happened? We saw theoretically, we saw a political shift, and we have a president in power that might not otherwise have been. And it's having massive implications globally. So these are the kinds of things that can happen, whether you believe that's good or bad. This is why we consider ethics when we're thinking about designing these systems now. So more generic examples, I guess. One of them, you'll have a talk later on tonight, I think, from Berghard about privacy. But this is just the kind of the one slide meta overview, which is that it's not just anymore about the stuff that you want to keep hidden that can be exposed. It can also be about stuff that you don't know about yourselves. And that's really a new view of privacy, and one that we haven't had previously so much. So now we know on the basis of little snippets. So this was a study that was based on people with mobile phones in their pockets that were using a particular type of application that took tiny little snippets of their voice throughout the day. They also used their location data and their mobility data, so where they were, how often they were moving and that kind of stuff. And they could, with a reasonable level of accuracy, predict whether somebody was depressed or not on the basis of that data. There are other systems that have been used to try and predict whether somebody's at risk of suicide. Now, you yourself might not be aware of that, but somebody somewhere developing this system is aware. And the ethical issues that arise from that are massive. Another system can identify up to half of the 8,000 known genetic syndromes just from the shape of your face. So based on facial recognition, they can sort of identify with a reasonable level of certainty whether there's that you have that gene within you. Now, I think most people sitting here don't really know what their genetic makeup is. It's like you couldn't tell me, I couldn't tell you. But theoretically, somebody else could tell you, or they wouldn't. They'd just know. They'd know something about you that you didn't know yourself. And the problem arises within ethics when there's a context shift. So here this is, you might think, well, it's okay, I don't care if somebody knows about my genes, but what if then that genetic condition could result in you being more likely to be sick in the long term, and that information was given to a future employer? Would that be a problem then? But we don't know how contexts shift. We can't predict it. We are historically terrible at it. So why not just design systems that mean that if that context shifts, we don't necessarily have to worry quite so much? And we also know that, for again, another Facebook example, because they're really naughty, is that they've used the data they gather from people in order to sell off profiles so that there can be better targeted advertising. But some of the profiles around whether you are in favour of Islam, whether you're in favour of homosexuality and liberalism, those are protected attributes. They're protected by law. So actually, if there is an action that results from somebody knowing that, that's illegal, but also it's sort of quite extreme discrimination. Speaking about discrimination, there's also the issue of bias, and everybody's heard about this, right? And the problem is that we don't have any solutions for it, I guess, which is why you're all here. We know that the training data that algorithms are trained on at the moment are biased because we're biased as human beings. I was giving a talk with somebody the other day, and somebody said, can you create an unbiased algorithm? And he said, well, can you create an unbiased human? And that's exactly it. It's like, the answer, of course, is no, but we can try and minimize some of the bias or the effects of that bias when it's applied in practice. The issue we have is that these kinds of systems can encode discrimination. So it's not just about the bias, it's about the fact that if something then happens as a result of it, that bias is hard-coded in that result. And that's the problem we have. And they can surface, again, these things that we call protected attributes or special category data, which is, again, protected by law. So, whether your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, your marital status are all protected by law. So, you can't discriminate against somebody because they're married or not married, or because they're gay or because they're not, or because they identify as a male or a female. All of those things are problematic. And then prejudice can happen. There's a really good book called Automating Inequality that came out relatively recently that talks about what happens when these kind of algorithms are deployed in social systems and the kind of bias that can occur. So, for example, you might be discriminated against in terms of the money that you can access around social services and social care in the United States because you live in a poor area. I mean, another correlate there is that you're more likely to be black if you live in a poor area. So suddenly you're discriminated against because you're black. So it's like the way that we correlate data is hugely problematic, particularly when it's linked up to things like, policing, credit scoring, employment, education, criminal justice, and mental health. And these, incidentally, are all domains where we use algorithms right now. That isn't a vision of the future, that's where we are. So because of this, everybody talks about the black box, algorithmic capacity. Surely all of our problems would be solved if we made algorithms transparent. That's an interesting idea. I don't think it's entirely true. So what do we do? How do we design algorithms then? Well, we've got to understand why they're opaque, firstly. So there's 3 different categories broadly. One is about trade secrets. So Facebook, Google, Microsoft, nobody's going to give up their algorithms so that you can have a look at them, because that's how they make their money. They might want to create some assurances that nothing is going on that's inappropriate, but they're not going to let you see that. Technical literacy. So for example, if you are a computer scientist, then you might understand what's going on with the system, and you're probably more forgiving. And you're probably able to make better judgments about what's going to happen as a result. But for a layperson, pretty much any algorithm is going to slay them. They won't understand what exactly is going on. They might have a broad idea, but it's more about kind of like folk theories, if you like, than it is sort of genuine understanding what's going on under the hood. And finally, there's a scale and complexity issue. And this is, again, the kinds of algorithms that are becoming much more prominent in the kind of experimental setting where we're proving that a computer can be as smart as a human. So things like deep neural nets. And these are problematic because it's almost impossible to untangle the logic. So even those people who design them would really struggle to tell you how it reached its decision. They might over time be able to tell you, they might be able to monitor it through another algorithm, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you straight away. And this is our current sort of most problematic area. So should we open the box? What happens, like if suddenly we make everything transparent? Well, we have this thing that people call the transparency paradox. So this is something that was written a while ago about by Helen Nissenbaum, who's at NYU. And she said that even if you opened up, like it's like a car engine, somebody that doesn't understand it, you're just like, I have no idea what I'm looking at here. And this is exactly the same with algorithms. If we opened these things up to people, they wouldn't understand it. So this brings us to the issue of legibility and intelligibility. How do we create these systems that are intelligible to the user? And how much stuff do you have to show them for them to understand what's going on so they can make reasoned judgments? And DARPA have given some examples of what you should do if you're trying to create an algorithm that is legible. So you should be able to ask some of these questions at least. Why did you do that? Why not something else? When do you succeed? When do you fail? When can I trust you? And how do I correct an error? And if we were able to answer all those questions, that they believe that that's almost enough information for people to be comfortable with algorithms and interact meaningfully. Whether that's true 10 years from now is another question, but right now that's the current thinking. Okay, so that's really, that's the end of the talk, just a quick brief overview. But this was, again, another quote from CogX. There was sort of people discussing ethics, and one of the guys stood up and he just said, look, we're on a race to the bottom globally. It's like, this is disgusting, we really have to do something about it. And these kinds of projects are the projects that are going to help bring us further up to the top. So that's it. Good luck over the next couple of days. I'm sure you're going to create brilliant things, and thanks for listening.